Today, we have two incredible guests. We want to welcome back Major General Nadav Padan, who was in Israel, was with the troops for a significant amount of time. He's back, and he's going to be giving us an update, a briefing on a number of issues. Our special guest today is Ben Hauptmann. Ben, originally an Australian Jew who was a corporate attorney. When he came to Israel, both he and his wife were in the legal corps. He is as a reservist. His wife is what's called Keva, a full-time member of the legal corps. And it's a fascinating and unfortunately a very challenging job. And you're going to hear a lot about what's happening, whether it's the Hague, whether it's other issues that don't necessarily make the newspaper. But Ben is incredibly articulate, wise, gifted, and we're very grateful for the opportunity to hear from him, to learn from him, and to hear, so to speak, there's two things. There's war, which is what we're involved in. And there's something else called lawfare. Lawfare is what happens when the enemies of Israel can't succeed on the battlefield, can't succeed through terrorism. They try to destroy us through the court system. They try to destroy Israel through international bodies. And Ben is here to talk about that and much, much more. Ben, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for those kind words. You probably should have said them about my wife, and then I would get some more brownie points. It really is a pleasure and an honor to be here. Over the past few months, one of my main roles has been briefing foreign ministries around the world, the UN, and in other international instances. So it really is a pleasure to be before a friendly audience and to be a bit relaxed and talk about some of these things with people that we know really support us. And so I think I'll start by thanking you for that support. It really means a lot to us, both your support as a nation, the American nation, our close allies, and importantly, your work with the FIDF and all your support. I know I see it firsthand. It means so much to our soldiers. So thank you very much for that. As the rabbi mentioned, I'm a lawyer in the IDF. I have been for about 12 years, and I work in what's called our International Law Department. Like every military, we have a legal department. In the US, you call it the JAG, the Judge Advocate General Corps. In Israel, it's called the MAG, the Military Advocate General Corps. And that's because our court system, the judges, are in a completely separate unit to the rest of the lawyers. And my unit are the rest of the lawyers, and separately we have a military court system. My department, the International Law Department, provides advice to the IDF on a range of international law issues, from targeting, weaponry, detainees, humanitarian obligations to the civilian population, cyber issues, and so on. We are all well-trained lawyers, all well-versed in international law, and we maintain very good relations with our colleagues overseas and are generally well regarded as experts in international law by similar units around the world. In addition to our core unit, like the rest of the IDF, we are heavily reliant on our reserve corps. And we have tens of lawyers from Israel, high-profile criminal attorneys, corporate lawyers, academics, and so on, who we train throughout the year in international law. And in times of contingencies like now, we call them up to pre-deployed positions and they give legal advice. But the best way to make sure that an army is integrating its legal obligations is not just through having lawyers, but making sure that the soldiers are educated well, and making sure that their obligations are integrated into the operational plans, the operating procedures, the rules of engagement, and so on. So that's one of our main roles. We have a dedicated school of military law, which provides legal training to commanders around the year. And the officers in the International Law Department are very much involved in the drawing up of operational plans, operating procedures, and so on. And this has been the case since October 7 as well. First thing on the morning in October 7, I was called up into duty, and so were the rest of the reserve duty officers in our department. And since then, we've been working around the clock, giving legal advice to the army and helping defend the army in international instances around the world. And we're dispersed throughout the country. We sit in the Kiryat, in the main IDF headquarters, giving legal advice to the general staff, chief of staff, and down. All the way down to the division level. We sit in the Southern Command, we sit in the Northern Command, we sit in the Gaza Division, we sit in the COGAT units, which are the units that are based on the Gaza border and facilitate humanitarian aid. And our advisors are very much integrated into the IDF process. Now, this is very challenging It's a challenging war operationally, as I'm sure you're aware. There are some unique aspects. Perhaps the most important one is the proximity. We are not fighting in an ocean, across the ocean in a country far away. We are fighting in our backyard in Gaza, and in this case, in our homes as of October 7. So this geographic proximity creates serious operational challenges for our forces. There's also the temporal proximity. If we have an aerial asset that identifies a terrorist priming a rocket for launch, if we don't take immediate action, that rocket can land 30 seconds later in a civilian population center inside Israel. We're also fighting a non-state actor, which, unlike other terrorist organizations of recent decades, has held territory and has controlled a population for 16 years. For 16 years, Hamas has used all the resources at its disposal, and it has significant resources being backed by Iran, being given billions of dollars in humanitarian aid, taking taxes from its population and controlling the territory. It has used all those resources to further its military agenda against Israel. And one of the biggest efforts that it does is to draw the fighting into the urban terrain. And for those of you who follow closely the news out of Gaza, you see just how much Hamas has exploited the urban terrain for its military operations. So those cause operational challenges for our causes, but they also cause our legal challenges. We call it an asymmetric conflict, because on the one hand, you have the IDF, which is the military of a democratic state, committed to the rule of law, which fulfills its legal obligations, goes beyond its legal obligations, integrates the law into all of its activities. And on the other hand, you have a non-state actor which not only directly violates the law by attacking civilians, murdering them directly and indiscriminately firing rockets into Israel, but also violates its legal obligations in its own territory with the way that it uses its population as human shields, with the way that it puts civilians at risk, and with the way that it causes harm to the surrounding civilian environment. So there is this asymmetry, but despite that, Israel remains committed to its international law obligations. Our senior political and military leadership has stated this repeatedly, that Israel is committed to the rule of law and to international law. These are our values. This is because we are part of the family of nations. It is important to us, and Israel has played an integral role in the development of international law over the years. In fact, Aaron Barak, who was the president of our Supreme Court, and who was acting as the ad hoc judge in the International Court of Justice now, once said in one of his decisions, he said, "A democracy fights with one hand behind its back, but it still has the upper hand." So even though we are beholden to rules that Hamas does not abide by, we still have the upper hand because we are fighting for our values as a democratic state, part of the family of nations, together with our allies such as the US. So that's why law is so integrated into the IDF procedures. The lawyers are part of the team. When the commander sits at the head of the table and around him sits the intel guys, the operational planners, the Air Force guys, the civilian population obligation people, we have the lawyer there as well. And when they assess military objectives, the lawyer is part of that team. And the commanders understand the importance of international law, both as our value set, but also the strategic importance of ensuring that we remain committed to the law and to remain a part of the family of nations. We also make a big effort to be transparent about these efforts. If you look on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, for example, you see a number of position papers detailing our legal obligations, how we interpret them, how we apply them, how we enforce them when there are individual violations. And as if you follow the spokesperson's social media accounts, you'll see just how much information we put out about what it is we're targeting, who we are targeting, what kind of measures we are implementing to mitigate civilian harm, and so on. And I think in many cases, you'll see that we go beyond our legal obligations. So take, for example, the issue of humanitarian aid. Under the law of armed conflict, which is the applicable law to this situation, a party to a conflict is not obligated to supply the other side to the conflict. It's logical also. You don't want to supply your adversary. Yet Israel continues to provide water to Gaza because we know that it is important for the civilian population. The law of armed conflict only requires that you allow the facilitation of supplies essential for the survival of the civilian population. Yet Israel is facilitating much more. We are helping set up field hospitals, floating hospitals. We're helping ambulances enter Gaza. We are helping people leave Gaza for medical treatment. We are facilitating the repair of critical infrastructure that's needed for the civilian population. And under the law of armed conflict, there is a specific statement that if there is reasonable concerns for fearing that consignments might be diverted from the civilian population and might be used by the adversary for their military activities, then you do not have to let it in. Yet even though we know that in many cases Hamas commandeers humanitarian aid, we are still making every effort to help international organizations and countries bring in that aid to Gaza and make sure it gets to the civilian population. And I think going beyond our international law obligations is a reflection of our values as a military and as a country. I'll show you some of the examples of the kind of challenges that we were talking about. So here, for example, this is a video released by Hamas, screenshots. You can see militants walking in civilian garb through the areas in Gaza with RPGs covered in blankets, and then going into civilian structures and firing on IDF forces. This obviously is an effort by Hamas to draw the IDF forces into the urban terrain, to create confusion between the civilians and the militants, and to deliberately cause damage by drawing return fire to the IDF to civilian objects. This is in a video released by Islamic Jihad. You can see they're taking a residential structure, putting holes in it and launching projectiles at IDF forces from inside these civilian structures. This is a video of IDF forces being fired at from inside a UN facility. And I think we have shown countless examples of how Hamas has used schools and other UN facilities for its military purposes. This is an example of a hospital where an IDF attack across the road from the hospital then resulted in these large secondary explosions, which attests to the fact that Hamas places explosives also not only within hospitals, but adjacent to hospitals. And as a result of IDF activity, those explosives cause massive secondary explosions and cause damages to critical infrastructure. In the face of these challenges, as I mentioned, we are doing a lot to try and mitigate civilian harm. One of the biggest efforts that we've developed in past years is the establishment of what we call the Civilian Harm Mitigation Unit, which is a dedicated unit in the Southern Command whose sole purpose is to monitor and direct the movement of the civilian population, to try and encourage them to leave areas of most intensive hostilities. And you can see here a map that this unit has developed, which designates numbers to specific neighborhoods in Gaza. And we provide this map through a number of mediums, social media, internet, websites, and so on, to the public in Gaza. And you can see on the right a screenshot from an explanatory video where we explain the system to the Gaza population. And we use this map to give forewarning to the civilian population in Gaza of where we will be operating, and to suggest to them where they can evacuate to, using what routes and at what hour. You can see here, for an example, from our Arabic social media account in southern Gaza, where we are currently operating, very specific instructions about specific localized neighborhoods which should evacuate according to which routes and where they might find shelter. These are all measures that the IDF takes to ensure it abides by its obligations under international law, and in many respects goes beyond them. Another method that we do are these tactical pauses. We announce in advance that the IDF will stop operating in certain areas in order to allow the civilian population to move, to replenish stocks, and so on. We've also established humanitarian zones where we try and work with international organizations to provide aid and to give shelter to the civilian population. Now, unfortunately, all these measures that we try and do, Hamas is trying to do the exact opposite, because one of its main tactics is keeping its people in the line of fire. So in these humanitarian zones, for example, you can see here, we have recorded over 100 launches from either within or adjacent to these zones. Hamas has also made efforts to stop the provision of humanitarian aid going into Gaza. On the left-hand side, you can see here a picture of the Erez Crossing, which is the crossing in the north of Gaza, where before October 7, almost 20,000 Gazans passed through each day into Israel to work. On October 7, Hamas attacked this crossing, killing and kidnapping personnel who worked there and destroying much of the crossing, causing it to close. So you can see that despite our efforts to ensure a commitment to the law, and in many cases even go beyond our requirements to the law, Hamas is trying to make that difficult for us. Now, the challenges that we face as a military, as a nation, and as lawyers don't end just on the battlefield. And as the rabbi mentioned, we are facing some challenges in the international arena as well. The most recent of those is South Africa's attempt to initiate proceedings at the International Court of Justice for the crime of genocide. And I found myself a month ago in a very surreal situation, sitting in a courtroom in The Hague, hearing the IDF and Israel being accused of genocide. Now, when someone has dedicated their entire professional career to ensuring that our military abides by its commitment to international law, it's somewhat an inversion of reality to be sitting there accused of the crime of crimes. And perhaps the most startling element of it was to look up at the bench at Aaron Barak, Israel's ad hoc judge, who is a Holocaust survivor himself, and who has dedicated his entire life to helping Israel ensure it abides by its commitments and to furthering the rule of law. And to think that this person had to listen to these spurious claims of South Africa about genocide. Now, fortunately, none of the provisional measures that South Africa requested from the court were granted. And the court case itself as to whether genocide is occurring or not will take many months, if not years, to happen. The provisional measures that the court gave did not find in any way that genocide is occurring or likely to be occurring or so on. Rather, it met a very, very low technical bar that the court has for these emergency measures. And the court gave orders such as Israel must ensure that it prevents genocide, Israel must take action against those who may be inciting to genocide, Israel must ensure that humanitarian aid is enabled to be brought into Gaza, and so on. So we're in the middle of that case now, and we'll have to see where it goes. To date, thanks firstly to Israel's commitment to international law, and also thanks to our very, very strong public service of lawyers from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Justice, the IDF, and so on. Israel stands steadfast and protected in the international arena. And as long as we retain our allies such as the US and we retain our commitment to the law and the truth, I believe that will continue to be the case. But it is certainly so that today's battle is not just on the field, and our legal advisors are not just sitting in Gaza in the Southern Command, but we are also facing serious challenges in the international arena. And with that, I'll end also with my thanks for your support, because when you sit there in The Hague accused of the crime of crimes, you feel quite alone. And so to know that we have the support of the American nation and of the American Jewish community and organizations like FIDF is so important, not only in a material sense for what you give to our country, but also just to know that that support is there, to know that we have those who are standing there backing us and standing behind us and standing with us overseas. So thank you for that as well. Rabbi?
Thank you, first of all, for giving us a context of how the IDF runs from a legal point of view, the incredible role that the legal department plays with the leadership on all levels, in the field, in the headquarters. And I don't think most of the participants who follow this appreciate, the morality, the ethics of having the legal department there from day one in every decision that's made in terms of anything that has ramifications or significance. And the way you explained that, thank you. And also thank you for explaining to us what exactly took place at the first round in The Hague and the role that is being played. From your perspective, and I understand it's an ongoing case, you may be limited what you can share with us. If you can draw out somewhat of a timeline, where does a case like this go? What are the next steps? Even though, I'm trying to speak in a very calm, moderate way, but those of us who've studied Raphael Lemkin, when the term genocide was created by international law, when it was employed at the Nuremberg laws, when it was adopted by Western nations, by the UN, crimes against humanity, another great Jewish jurist from the Ukraine, Lauterbach, and the sickness, the evil, the heinous nature of taking these terms and using them against the most moral army in the history of humanity, not just the most moral army on the globe today as we speak, but in the history of humanity. There's something insidious, there's something horrifically evil about that. And it gives us, I would say, we have incredible disappointment in humanity that they tolerate this. When they take a term like genocide and they turn it on the very, very people who it was perpetrated against, and they call the victims now the perpetrators.
Yes, absolutely. In terms of where the case is going, we'll have to wait and see. Now the court has given its provisional measures. It's asked Israel to file a report as to show that it's abiding by these provisional measures and how it's implementing them. And then there'll be a continuation of the case. We'll have to see how that unfolds. But you're absolutely right that this is an inversion of reality, that Israel is being accused of genocide, and especially when the state of Israel was one of the first countries to adopt the Genocide Convention, which was born out of the ashes of the Holocaust. And you mentioned Raphael Lemkin, who coined the word genocide and was the founder of this effort to make this the crime of crimes and to ensure that humanity prevents it from happening ever again. And I think as we presented at The Hague, this effort by South Africa has a real danger of cheapening that important effort of the international community after the Holocaust to make sure that genocide never occurs again. But it not only has the risk of cheapening the Genocide Convention, but I think it portends badly for like-minded states around the world. Because when you have a terrorist organization that deliberately attacks civilians and then hides behind its own civilians, lies about the number of casualties and the extent of damage, and it requires a state to use a large amount of force in urban areas in order to protect itself, and then that can be coined genocide and brought to the ICJ under the Genocide Convention. That portends badly for states who might find themselves in similar situations in the future. I think other terrorist organizations, ISIS and those, are watching very carefully what's going on in Gaza and what's going on in The Hague. And if they see that it works for them, that hiding behind and within and under hospitals is something that works, then that will happen more so. If they see that drawing the fighting into the urban terrain and hiding behind civilians could result in the state being brought before the International Court of Justice, then we'll see that happening more. So I think this is not just Israel's problem. This is a problem for all democracies who are committed to the rule of law, who feel an obligation to protect their civilians, who may have to fight in the future. And I think all of them should be standing by Israel to make sure that this case fails.
Thank you. If you could spend a couple of minutes, because General Padan over the course of the briefings has described to us that the law in Judea and Samaria is actually under the rubric of the military. Can you describe your role in that as the legal team, how things are adjudicated, both in terms of whether it's issues with the Jewish population, the Muslim population, the Arab population, with the soldiers, in the situation in Judea and Samaria, which has existed since 1967, are there parallels to that in other places in the world?
Sure. Well, he's absolutely correct. Of course, the Major General, the West Bank is not under an Israeli system of law because it's not technically Israeli territory. So it's under this system of international law. And under the system of international law, the military force that governs the area is the governing authority. So that means there's a very complicated rubrics of legislation that governs the West Bank, from military orders to the law that was extant when we came into the West Bank, which is Jordanian law and even British mandate law. Now, because we've been there for some time and hasn't been resolved, the final resolution of this conflict, so that law has to evolve as time passes and as the world changes. So there are a lot of updates accordingly, a lot of changes to legislation, which involve a lot of governmental authorities, not just the IDF, but from a technical standpoint, that's correct. The IDF is the governing authority in the West Bank.
Are there parallels today in the contemporary world? Are there parallels to that situation?
I can't think of anything which is quite as protracted and complex as our conflict, but that would be more of a political question, not for a man on uniform. What we do have is a separate department in the Military Advocate General Corps, which is just dedicated to the West Bank. So my department is the International Law Department. We have a standalone department whose sole role is to provide legal advice to the military and to the governmental authorities that are engaged with day-to-day activities in the West Bank.
And then the final question we have for you, in terms of the Israeli military, Israeli security establishment, the interaction, the partnership, the camaraderie that exists between America and Israel, between the British forces and Israel, is really, really something wonderful to see. And they learn and they grow from each other. It's a two-way relationship. In terms of your division, the legal division, do you have interaction with the JAGs in America? Do you have interaction with the British legal, the military legal department, other countries, Germany, etc., where you discuss these issues, where you engage on these issues?
We do, absolutely. Because we work in international law, so our colleagues around the world are in the same field, and I think something that our international colleagues really acknowledge is that Israel is as a very tried and tested system of implementing the law of armed conflict. There are very few, if any, militaries that face the same security challenges that we have, that are engaged in conflict, unfortunately, as often as we have. That face non-state actors that so systematically and purposefully and extensively violate international law as we do. And I think that means that they know that we have extensive experience. And Israeli lawyers in international law have gone on to be very senior figures in the Israeli system, from attorney general to Supreme Court judges and presidents of the Supreme Court. But have also gone on to be international law experts worldwide, whether in law firms overseas or in academia or in public service positions internationally. So our unit is quite highly regarded, if just by virtue of the fact that we have a lot of practical experience. But we enjoy wonderful relationships with many colleagues overseas. Every 2 years, we hold a conference on the law of armed conflict in Israel, where we bring, I think the last time was over 150 of the top lawyers from countries around the world, from international organizations, from universities, and we spend a few days discussing topical issues on the law of armed conflict. We publish with our colleagues and travel the world meeting with them. So we're very thankful for that relationship, and first and foremost with the US, of course.
Thank you. And thank you. Your ability to articulate, to communicate, especially most of us participating in this Zoom do not have a legal background. In the way that you take very nuanced, complicated issues and explain them in such an articulate fashion, we're very grateful to you. And we're also very grateful that you're representing Israel, you're representing the IDF. We wish you, your wife, and your family incredible success. And we pray for the safety of our soldiers, for the safety of the hostages. And we're very proud to have you representing the IDF and the Jewish Army.
Thank you. The feeling is very much mutual.
Wishing you a wonderful week. All the best. Bye-bye. At this point in time, if we could now pass it over to Major General Nadav Padan, who's back from Israel, who's going to be sharing with us a number of updates about the issues on the ground in the south and the north, and other issues that right now are taking place. Major General Padan.
Thank you, Steve. First of all, I want to thank Ben. And you could hear that he explained to a dumb general like me about law for years, so he's an expert to explain law to dummies. To your questions, I must add two things. First of all, the Central Command have his own division. So there is two colonels, one that's responsible for the court in Judea and Samaria, the military court, and the other is a law advisor for the commander. And they're both colonel. It's a department division that not exists in other geographic command in the IDF. So it's unique for Judea and Samaria. And the other thing I want to add is through the word between the line of Ben, you could almost think that democracy is an obstacle when it comes to maneuvering to Gaza Strip, but it's one of the goals of the war in a way. The mission of the IDF is to defend the citizens of the IDF, the border of Israel, and the citizens of Israel, the border of Israel, and also the value of Israel. So in a way, our democracy that we're very proud of is part of the goal of this war, to defend the democracy value of Israel. So there is limitation. We are proud to have those limitations because it's part of the goal of the war. To what's going on right now in Israel, and I very briefly go from the north to the south and focus in two areas in Lebanon and Gaza. The situation when it comes to Iran, Iraq, and Syria continue. The militia in Iraq and Syria continue the challenge against the American base in Iraq and Syria, and also launching rocket tower, the Golan Heights, in the north part of Israel. Try to push the leadership in Judea and Samaria, the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamic Jihad, and Hamas to be more active and fight against the forces of the IDF and against the settlements inside Judea and Samaria. They are a bit frustrated from the fact that the influence in Judea and Samaria, and especially on the Arab Israeli that lives inside the Green Lines of Israel, are very limited. Thank God, most of the leaders of the Israel Arab are not adopting October 7. They are rejecting the way that the Hamas act on October 7, and therefore they are not supporting Hamas. Most of them. There is cells of Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood inside Israel, but they are not that active over the last 130 days. When it comes to Lebanon, we are in kind of a breaking point or breaking zone. Although both sides are trying to keep the friction under the threshold of war, and both sides are trying to find kind of diplomatic solution to the situation in the north. In a way, go back with some extension to the 1701 agreement that we had in 2006. There is a lot of challenges keeping this friction without doing a mistake or without doing miscalculation of what happened. So last day, Hezbollah launched a very wide attack over the northern border of Israel, including launching rocket to the city of Tzfat, to the headquarters of the Northern Command in Tzfat, and all along the border. One of the rockets hit a private house in Tzfat, with a lot of casualties. One family, 8 people. One of them, young lady, lost her life, and 2 of them were severely wounded. So Israel are launching from this morning till now a very wide strike toward the south part of Lebanon. And those kind of events could lead us to a situation that we are not wishing to be in. So although we are trying to be under the threshold of war, the situation is very fragile. Simple tactical mistake could lead us to the wrong places. And we all remember how, for example, the war in 2006 started. Well, limited terror attack on the west side of the border, and they are launching rocket toward Israel. We are launching strike toward Lebanon, and we find ourselves in 36 days of war. So that could happen. We have to be very worried about the last development over the last 48 hours at the north. When it comes to Gaza, I think that the situation are getting closer and closer to the goal of breaking the structure, the military structure of Hamas. I would say that at the center, the north of Gaza, there is no functional structure of command. There is terrorists, there is cells of terror, 15 here, 20 there, but there is no chain of command that actually control what's going on in Gaza, the north and center part of Gaza. They're still controlling the south part of Gaza, the what we call the Philadelphia corridor, the border between Egypt and Gaza Strip and the city of Rafah, which be the next challenge of the IDF. And that's going to be a big challenge because, as we all know, most of the people that lives at the north and the center of Gaza Strip withdraw and move to the south. So there is like extra 1.2 million people that lives there as refugees in this area, and that's going to be a huge challenge for Israel. Israel, for the last 3 weeks, trying with the international NGOs and national support to build kind of refugees camp along the shore of the Mediterranean and push the refugee out of the city of Rafah to camps and allowed or create a better condition for the operation in Rafah. But still, the challenge is huge. The one of you that saw the rescue mission of those 2 hostages in Rafah could see and feel the amount of friction and the amount of people that are in the street in the middle of the night. It was 2:00 in the morning, and the streets were full, and the amount of friction that those units had during the withdrawal from the house were tremendous. So we'll be after Rafah in a situation that we more or less destroyed the military structure of Hamas. When it comes to I would say the political leadership of Hamas, the fact that we didn't agree what how look like the day after and who's going to lead Gaza, it's a challenge. It's a challenge for the IDF right now, and it's a challenge for Israel, because as long as you're not creating any substitute to Hamas, you withdraw from the north part of the Gaza Strip, and Hamas local clerk are taking over the streets again. They are the one that provide food, and they are the one that launch the force of the streets of the north part of Gaza, and that's a challenge. And parallel to that, you can see that the IDF, although most of the forces withdraw from the north part of Gaza, were launching strike every day. Today, the IDF attacked a car and killed 4 terrorists that drove a car inside the city of Gaza, the main streets of Salahuddin streets, the main streets of Gaza City. And I think that the next step in Rafah will take another few weeks, and I would say that if nothing going to happen, if there won't be no changes, in about 2 months, we'll be in a situation that we can control Gaza different than today. I mean, without strike and without using all the reservists, we can do it with 2 divisions. That one will control the border of Gaza Strip, and the other will be responsible for cleaning the cities and the camp inside the Gaza Strip from Hamas and Islamic Jihad cells. That's going to take a while. To remind ourselves, after the operation in Judea and Samaria in 2002, it took us around 4 years to clean the cities of Judea and Samaria, and the level of friction will go down and down, lower and lower over the years. But again, it's not going to be a war. It's going to be a kind of an ongoing security routine operation in Gaza. That's my assumption for the next month. And in Lebanon, as I mentioned, once we'll solve the thing in Gaza, we'll be able to solve the thing in Lebanon. If we want to, is both of us, the Hezbollah and us, won't do mistake over the next few weeks.
General Padan, could you speak specifically about the western part of Khan Yunis, where we've been reading that they believe many of the leadership are there. That's rumors that there are possibly hostages there, and that after having controlled the eastern and southern part of the city, that right now the IDF is really closing in terms of its control of the western Khan Yunis. Is that the case?
So, yeah, I mean, we know that there is hostages in Khan Yunis. We don't know about all the hostages, but we have information here and there about hostages in Khan Yunis. As you could see, this last week, we had information about hostages in Rafah as well. So we don't know, as I mentioned, where every hostage are located, but when we have information, we're doing our best to get and rescue them. An operation like the one that occurred last week happens every second week, I would say. With not great success, unfortunately. We wish to have success like we had last week in our two-digit number of operation over the last 130 days. When it comes to the leadership of Hamas, I would say that the high leader of Hamas are running away. We don't know exactly where they are. They could be in Rafah, they could be in Khan Yunis. They maybe ran out of Gaza Strip, we don't know. About the mid-range or the mid-level of leadership, the head of the military, the battalion commander, brigade commander, and so far, we have some information. I don't want to get too deep into it, but you could see over the last days that every few days there is like a very accurate surgical strike into Khan Yunis or the area of Khan Yunis, and we're killing another leader, another advisor, another lay leader from the military organization. So if you ask about Sinwar, I don't know where he is. Maybe someone in the IDF know, but I don't know. I know that the IDF tried to hunt him, it declared it, so it's not a secret. But the structure under him are under attack all the time, and every day we're hearing about another leader that been said to meet Allah.
Are there any operational battalions that are still functional in Western Khan Yunis? I'm talking about Hamas operational battalions.
So there is only one that are still more or less operating as a battalion with a structure of command, and even this battalion are severely hit. So I mean, the battalion commander give order to the platoon commander, but it's not necessarily happen because there is no terrorists to launch the order that get from the command. So they still have one battalion with functional chain of command, but its ability to challenge the IDF is very limited. What the IDF is facing, I would say from the second month of the maneuver into Gaza Strip, is not war against organized terror military, but friction with small group of 3 or 4 or 5, 15 terrorists. When it comes to bases, the number could be a little bit higher, but in most cases, those are the groups that are challenging our military with no chain of command. A lot of the leader ran away. They are not like the IDF that the commander shout, "Follow me," and lead it's the soldier. When it comes to Hamas terror organization, the leadership cached under the ground, sending the soldier to die for them. So you could see that the leadership of Hamas in the movie are with the family, with guards, with food, with everything. they're not exactly suffering, while the soldier, like the terrorist, are eating half pita every second day. So it's different kind of culture, I would say.
Mm. You led a group of American generals, of British generals and colonels into Gaza, and one of them happened to address us, Colonel Richard Kemp, and he said that representing the British and representing the Americans, they were just astounded at the success that the IDF is having, at the abilities of the IDF, the ability to limit casualties on both sides, both Israeli soldiers as well as civilian casualties, under what he described as the most impossible and difficult circumstances because of the densely populated urban areas that the IDF is fighting in. And he said that anyone who has any understanding of military and urban warfare would just be incredibly impressed and astounded at the success, at the abilities of what the IDF has done over the last 4 months.
Oh, definitely. I mean, Steve, without any exaggeration, the Gaza Strip is the most complicated fighting arena on earth. And never in the history of modern war, army faced that kind of complicity. I mean, that kind of subterranean system, of sophistication and this amount and of military equipment. And having said that, the maneuver didn't lose what Ben just spoke at the very beginning of this meeting. Didn't lose the value, fighting very accurately against the terrorist without over very limited collateral damage compared to other military. The percentage, the amount of collateral damage is very, very low, which is a huge success. And it's lay on the ability of the human being in the IDF, I would say. The fact that the IDF is the army of the people, and you can find reservists that on a regular day is a professor at Tel Aviv University, and now he's a platoon commander, is a man with value, is a man with brain, is a man that can make complicated decisions. And that's the strength of the IDF, the human beings that are the human puzzle of this army. It's a strength that help us be human, be very army with very strong values. So I would say that the term from the Bible, lo b'chayil velo b'koach ki im b'ruchi amar Hashem tzvaot, works. Not with your army and not with your force, but with your spirit, so say mighty God. That's the strength of the IDF, the spirit and the value of the leader of the soldier. And I'm very proud in two things. First of all, in the leadership that lead this maneuver, but I feel that I must add the young generation of Israel, that everybody criticize as the Z generation. They want to play computer all day. They have no value. They're acting amazingly. I wish that my generation, 37 years ago, did the same kind of maneuver like this generation. They're amazing, and I'm very proud of them and very proud of the leadership of the IDF, what they're doing in Gaza Strip, and the generals from Britain and the US and other European countries saw it in their own eyes, and from their professional eyes could definitely identify and admire the way it's done over the last 100 days.
Thank you. Major General Padan, it's wonderful to have you back on the briefings. It's an honor to have you. What we'll do, because we're running a little bit late today, on Sunday's briefing, we'll take a few minutes with Major General Padan to speak about this incredible system in terms of PTSD, what the MOD, the Ministry of Defense, is doing, the IDF, all that being funded by the Friends of the IDF. And we want to share with our participants what they're doing in terms of looking after the soldiers, both those who suffer from acute PTSD, those who are suffering from less acute PTSD. We'll talk about that Sunday as well. We've just had a funding initiative where we've transferred very significant millions of dollars for the sake of supporting the families of those who have been wounded. Many of the reservists, as you know, have children, have spouses, and especially in a time when they're not able to return to their position, whether it's in a hospital, a high-tech firm, because of the wounds that they've suffered in this war. The funding that we're doing to support those families, again, all under the guidance and the leadership of the Ministry of Defense. We'll talk more about that on Sunday. We want to wish everyone a wonderful week. Thank you.